Hello, this is Jeff, another in my series on science and faith. Today talking about dinosaurs and answering a question that many Christians have: what about dinosaurs? And we're going to show you all the scientific evidence to support that dinosaurs make better sense within the creation model. And you'll realize that this is not a question you need to answer, but one that you get to ask others. If you stick to the end, you'll see what I mean by that. We're talking today about dinosaurs and biblical creationism, also referred to as young earth creationism. I'm going to take you from belief in biblical creation, despite dinosaurs, to because of dinosaurs. And yes, that is a picture of our Lord and Savior riding on a T-Rex. I love this picture. I added it in because many years ago, as I studied dinosaurs, I realized that dinosaurs make better sense within a young earth model. And many others feel the same way as they started seeing pictures like this, and I realized that that's the sentiment among young earth creationists. We also realized that Colossians chapter 1 tells us that all things were created through Christ. It says that all things were made by him and for him. Dinosaurs were therefore made by Christ and for him to enjoy. All right, before we get into the scientific evidence, I do need to do a little bit of background and help answer some of those questions people have about dinosaurs. All right, to begin with, a quick review on biblical creationism. This all comes from Genesis chapters 1 through 11. To begin with, God created everything in 6 24-hour days about 6,000 years ago. Dinosaurs were created on day 6 as herbivores. We're going to come back to that later. Originally, God called everything very good. No death or disease. It wasn't until after the fall where we saw death, disease, and God even specifically mentioned thorns. Keep that in mind. Animals became carnivorous after the fall. 1,500 years later was the global flood, killing everything except the animals and the people on the ark. During this flood is where we see all the rock layers created, continents separating, and the mountains rising towards the end of the flood. So when you see animals in the everything buried within those layers, the fossils in there, that all happened during this flood. Important concept to keep in mind is the end of the flood. After the flood is when the Ice Age occurred. We have a better explanation for why there even was an Ice Age. This is important to understand because when you look at fossils, you see things like this. In the first picture, we see dinosaurs attacking each other. This was after the fall. In the middle picture, we see dinosaurs with bone disease. Disease was after the fall. Thorns were after the fall. Very important concepts to understand. This next slide I know is a little bit busy. I'm just putting it here because I wanted to give some scriptural support. Forgive me for not going through these and explaining these. But these were the concepts: that the waters rose for 5 months, that there were big tsunamis, and then mountains rose at the end. So I just want to offer those, pause it, look through those for yourself. All right, let's get to common questions about dinosaurs. I divided this into two groups. The first are more scripture-related. The second are more science-related. Jumping right into the first, are they described in the Bible? There are two places. One is Behemoth. You can pause and read that if you want. The next is Leviathan. Pause and read that if you want. As you see that these don't describe anything that we see today. Those describe dinosaurs. Another question people have, somebody asked me if there were dinosaurs in the garden, and I thought, yeah, that's actually not a problem. We know that dinosaurs were herbivores to begin with based on Genesis 1:9, and that is not a challenge or an issue at all. If God wants an animal to be a herbivore, it is. And it doesn't matter if they have big teeth. For example, consider this. This is a lioness in captivity who would absolutely refuse to eat meat and just only ate vegetables. Also, brown bears and grizzly bears, 90% of the meal is berries. So just because something has big teeth doesn't mean it has to kill and eat other things. So that's not an issue. A lot of questions about the ark. Would they fit and have enough food, and would they eat each other? Pretty simple. People who raise these questions haven't done the feasibility study. Those who have done feasibility studies said, yes, they actually would fit, and there would be enough food, and they would be able to take care of all of them. Keep in mind, you don't put big dinosaurs in the ark, you put babies and juveniles. And yes, there's enough food. Now, as far as would they attack and kill each other, consider this verse, Genesis 7:15. Noah didn't go around getting lions. God sent the lion to Noah. And it's not very difficult to think, okay, and he said, by the way, don't eat them. So, yeah, it's not a problem to have dinosaurs on the ark. All right, next I want to jump into more scientifically related questions. Rock layers, order of burial. This comes up a lot. You say, hey, humans were buried last. Okay, understand everything that we see in the fossil record wasn't, millions of years of geological activity. It was simply how things were buried, the order of burial. It began deep in the ocean, moved up into the coastal regions, moved into the continent, and then into the centers of the continent. And, most likely the humans were knowing what was going on and were avoiding the flood as much as possible. So that's just simply the order of burial. It's not a big issue that humans were buried last. Also, fossils do not take a long time to form. All you need to do is get them buried. And in fact, if you see a fossil, it was something that got buried. It didn't just lay there and slowly get covered. It has to be buried quickly, and then the fossil formation doesn't take a long time to form. As far as the millions of years, that is definitely a big topic, a big question people have if we're saying that everything was created 6,000 years ago. Don't have time to get into this in great detail. Just understand that millions of years is based on radiometric dating of lava flows and volcanic ash. Our answer to that is accelerated radiometric decay. I'll have another video on that topic. So that really explains the millions of years. Regarding their extinction, obviously all dinosaurs died in the flood, except for the few remaining on the ark. And we believe that the world before the flood was a much different environment, had much more lush vegetation, and that the world's climate drastically changed after the flood. And we believe that the dinosaurs did not thrive as well in this new environment. All right, so hopefully that covers most people's questions about dinosaurs. All right, now we can get to the good part. Scientific evidence that dinosaurs are better explained by biblical creationism. All right, by the way, if you look in this picture, this is pretty typical. You see dinosaurs with volcanoes in the background. That's because during the global flood, there was a lot of volcanic activity and a lot of volcanic ash buried along with those dinosaurs. Okay, here is a list of categories we're going to go over. I'm not going to read through them. We're going to jump right in with original soft tissue found in dinosaur fossils. Understand this, the picture on the left, what you're seeing, fossils. When we see fossils, we're not seeing original bone. Okay, when an animal gets buried, all the original material gets eaten up by bacteria, gets dissolved, and replaced by minerals. So when you're holding a fossil, you're holding the shape of the original bone, not the original bone material. However, a number of years back, scientists started to find original biological material, collagens, proteins, all right, blood vessels, DNA even. These things cannot last for millions of years. So this is a real problem for them. All right, dinosaurs cannot have existed hundreds of millions of years ago based on original soft tissue. Now I know you're asking, well, how do they respond to this? You know what's amazing? They ignore it. They just say, oh, well, apparently they can last for millions of years. So this to me is a great example of where we can say that dinosaurs make better sense within the creation model. What about dinosaurs is our answer, our question for them. However, don't be surprised when they just ignore it. All right, speaking of soft tissue, this is a great AI interview, a Grok interview that this gentleman makes. And this was the question later on in his interview. He posed this question, but it was really good. He puts no parameters. He just said, I'm a first-time user. Tell me about dinosaurs. And he gets the typical answer. All right. Early in the interview, he parameterized his input. And this is very important to do in AI models. He tells the AI model, say, only use strict logic, mathematical probability, and observational science. Don't rely on ideologies, God, materialism, or conforming to consensus science. That's a fancy word for what do most scientists think or believe. So there you can read his question and the answer. And the answer then comes back, can't be more than a few thousand years old. Absolutely matches the biblical model. It also shows you how important it is to parameterize your input on an AI model, and the fact that most people aren't going to do that. They're just going to go into Grok and say, tell me about dinosaurs, or did dinosaurs live recently or a long time ago? And the AI model is going to say, oh, a long time ago. So, all right, next topic is carbon-14. Again, these cannot be millions of years old. Anything with carbon-14 in it cannot last, and carbon-14 cannot last for millions of years inside of a fossil. And what's amazing is we're seeing carbon-14 throughout the rock records, throughout the fossil record. We have a fossil record that, according to radiometric dating, goes back, 500 million years ago. and yet they all contain 14. And the ranges is all within 20 to 50,000 years. Don't get caught up by that. That can be explained within the creation model. But the point is they all have about the same amount of carbon-14 in them. All throughout the fossil record, all these layers that are supposedly millions of years apart, but they're all containing about the same amount of carbon-14, which is telling us that all these things were buried around the same time. Carbon-14 absolutely fits better within the creation model, and that is why dinosaurs make more sense within the creation model. All right, for this next section, I need to go over what's called the beds model, briefly exposed diluvial sediments, which is mud, basically. So remember this, that during the flood, the waters was rising for over a period of 5 months, interspersed with huge tsunamis, which created the many sedimentary layers. Here's a little graphic to explain this, okay? So in this first video, this is right after a tsunami came in, maybe on a peninsula, laid a bunch of mud, the water's receding, okay? During that time, maybe one of the dinosaurs died. Since it occurred over a 5-month period of time, we know that there's going to be dinosaurs that have to lay eggs. And so you'll see a dinosaur lay some eggs. You'll see dinosaurs making some footprints, okay? Another tsunami comes in the middle here. Some of the larger dinosaurs can survive, okay? Brings in a bunch of mud, then the waters recede, and now here's what you see. You see dinosaur eggs being buried. You see those fossil footprints being buried, and then you see the ones that are surviving up on top of that. Another thing to keep in mind, remember, we believe in accelerated radiometric decay. Decay is dating volcanic ash. So there might have been some volcanic ash in this first layer. Later, these may be, days or weeks may go by between tsunamis, okay? There might be some accelerated decay going on, which is going to date these. These two rock layers, even though they might be days or weeks apart, the radiometric dating may show them to be hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions of years apart, even though within our model they're just days or weeks apart. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Keep these images in mind as we're continuing on to talk about dinosaurs. Another quick concept is bioturbation. Bioturbation is basically displacement of sediment due to faunal activity. It's animal activity. So on the left here you see a new mud layer gets created. Over time, you're going to get little animals, critters stirring it up, creating evidence that these animals are in there. So if you see a mud layer, then another mud layer right on top of it, and you don't see bioturbation, you know that those were laid down quickly together. All right, so keep that in mind as we get into our evidence. We're going to start with dinosaur tracks and footprints. Anytime you see tracks, you know two things. One, there was a mud source to begin with. Then a dinosaur comes walking along the mud, then that needed to be quickly buried over. The reason for that is because footprints like this are not going to survive. There's a lot of erosion that goes on over continents. In fact, keep this in mind, an entire continent worth of erosion can occur within 10 to 50 million years. That's like the amount of dirt and rock layer we're talking about over the continental United States. Okay, that erosion over 10 to 50 million years is going to erode that away. Now, there might be some uplift, but then you're going to have new fresh layers, but the top layer is going to erode away in that amount of time. So that's an important thing to understand. If you've ever seen these, you're going to know that they got buried over quickly in order to preserve them. Also, there's not a lot of bioturbation in the lower layer. So just some things to keep in mind as we examine dinosaur footprints. So let's look at some evidence to start off with. In Wyoming, same species of dinosaurs made tracks in two layers in the same area, separated by 3 million years. Okay, so in this picture you'd see dinosaur comes in, makes some tracks, new layer comes in, the accelerated decay dates the new layer at 3 million years later. Same dinosaur makes tracks on top of that. Okay, picture this from an evolutionary standpoint. A lot happens in 3 million years. Okay, if you see dinosaurs in an area, that's because there's an ecosystem that can support those dinosaurs. Okay, if the climate changed, they would move on to somewhere else. If there was an ice age, they would move on to somewhere else. There's a lot that's going to happen in 3 million years. So it's much more likely within the creation model to see this, a layer of tracks, and then another layer come along, and more tracks by the same species. That is less likely within the evolutionary model. the old Earth model. Now keep in mind, we're not saying it's impossible. It's just a lot less likely. In fact, evolutionists are very good at believing very impossible things. So we're just saying this is one example where dinosaur tracks make better sense within the creation model. All right, let's look at another one here. We have in Glenrose Texas tracks of only the front feet of sauropods. These are huge 4-foot animals. Okay, so somewhere we discovered that there were some tracks that were buried over. Now, what they've done is they've cleared away this area to see all the tracks that they could find, and what they found was sauropod tracks, but they only see the front footprints. How do they explain that? They see must have been dinosaurs walking through the mud in water. All right, keep in mind, notice how many times you see water, dinosaurs in water, wading in water, swimming in water, dying in water. It happens a lot. This is just another example of that. This makes absolute sense within the creation model. There's a lot of water. There's dinosaurs walking along, leaving footprints. All right, how about another one here? Swimming and wading dinosaurs, okay, in China. And you can read through this. I just put in yellow the things that are important. Okay, they're in some areas, they're only sweeping, touching it a little bit with toe scratches. Okay, they're wading in water, possibly during a flood event. This is why dinosaurs make better sense within the creation model. A lot of dinosaurs swimming and wading in water. All right, another example, a stampede of swimming dinosaurs. All right, here they found some dinosaur tracks. They built a building around it to preserve them. Okay, but look at this, shallow water, swim or swim tracks. It would be very difficult, impossible to have formed on land. Okay, tracks were made in a current of water. Dinosaurs likely being taken with a current of water. Once again, dinosaur tracks make better sense within the creation model. All right, let's look at this one. Dinosaur footprints 166 million years ago. You can read the description here on the right. That was written by a creationist that says, look, a lot happens over 166 million years, and yet here we see dinosaurs. I know they were covered up briefly after they were created so that they would last this long. That's a long time for these to last, or these. 200 million years ago in an ancient lake, some dinosaur tracks, but yet there they are for us to see. I really like this one. Okay, dinosaur tracks in roof of coal seams. Let me explain what I mean by roof of coal seams. Okay, so this large area here is a coal seam. Okay, as they're digging away, they notice in the roof, the top part is the impression of a footprint. So what happened is a coal seam gets created, dinosaurs go stomping around on the top of it, then another layer comes in on top of that and buries those. That's why it's said that they're in the roof of coal seams. But here's what's exciting. Coal seams make better sense within the creation model. Within rock formations, this is one of my favorites to talk about, is coal seams. Okay, in addition to dinosaurs, I love talking about coal seams because these things are very difficult to explain within an evolutionary model or an old Earth model. You see, this coal seam that you see right here, it would take a whole bunch of vegetation, and it would have to get compressed down just to make this coal seam here. All right, let alone something this large. So you're seeing very large layers. It takes a lot of vegetation. It has to be compressed down. Oftentimes you see a sharp layer below and a sharp layer above. Okay, this is much better explained within the creation model. And I like to say this, evolutionists, what about coal seams? Okay, well, here's our answer. It goes back to the beds model. Because there were these huge tsunamis, they would rip out a lot of vegetation, float out into the ocean. But at some point in time, this large amount of vegetation gets washed up onto a shore like this. Then dinosaurs go tromping around on it. Then it gets buried. So coal seams make better sense within the creation model, and in particular, coal seams with dinosaur tracks on the top of them make better sense within the creation model. All right, real quickly here, you can read this, but basically what they're seeing is they're noticing that you're seeing rock layers where you're seeing dinosaur footprints. No dinosaurs being buried, just the footprints. And then supposedly millions of years later, other rock layers, you're seeing dinosaurs actually buried. So we're to believe that there's an era of time when dinosaurs are only leaving footprints. Then millions of years later, another era of time when they get buried. this really makes more sense within the biblical worldview, where they leave some footprints, and then days or weeks later, more layers, and then days or weeks later after that, and then they get buried. All right, let's move on to dinosaur eggs. Eggs without nests. So this is a worldwide phenomenon, rarely with a nest structure, because they didn't have time to build it. As you remember from that beds model, briefly exposed. You get a layer get created, it's briefly exposed. Dinosaurs need to give birth. They lay eggs. They don't have time to make a nest. And then another layer comes on and buries that. That's what we see. We see it worldwide. All right. This is a quote from a secular source. All right. They're saying this: trace fossil evidence of dinosaur nest construction is extremely rare. All right. They have to make sense of this. A one-off, sure, but to see a pattern of that worldwide just makes better sense within the creation model. All right, kind of the same thing. I know there's a lot to read. The top sections, again, they're laying eggs in a flat sediment. All right. But I really love the second part here. All right, look at this. Eggs buried in marine sediments. Okay, when you say marine, you mean ocean sediments. Okay, what are eggs doing in marine sediments? You either have eggs that have to get carried out into marine sediments to get buried, or you've got a bunch of ocean water up on land burying eggs. All right, dinosaur eggs. All right. I love this one. I'm just saying this real quick. I have a book, page 182 of that same book. It talks about polystrate eggs, eggs intruding through multiple layers. All right. Anytime you see polystrate, you've got an issue when things are dated much older, and yet there's something that's intruding in between multiple layers. So another issue about eggs. So just to summarize real quick, eggs, dinosaur eggs, there's a lot of them all around the world, and they make better sense within the creation model. All right, now we're turning towards nature of burial. There's a lot within this section. Okay, here's some of it right here. First of all, large dinosaur graveyards. Okay, it takes a lot just to bury one dinosaur. You've got to get the whole dinosaur covered up. But when you have large graveyards of many dinosaurs all carried together, you know that there was some big catastrophic event that happened. And this happens worldwide. We're seeing large dinosaur graveyards throughout the world, and they're often buried in marine layers. Okay, marine animals, sharks and clams. Okay, that is another worldwide phenomenon. Catastrophic environments, catastrophic events going on here. The ones appearing like they were transported. Okay, we see dinosaurs. Most of them are vegetarians and take a lot of vegetation to support them. All right, but when we see them buried, we don't see them buried in the environment, the ecosystem that would support them, that they live on. And basically, here's a good example here. You can go watch this video. It's just a 1-minute video, but it's asking the question, where's all the vegetables? Saying that these dinosaurs need to be in an ecosystem to support them, but they're not being buried there. They're being transported, carried along, and dumped somewhere else. All right. I like this one here. A flood of death. Remember, dinosaurs buried in water, dying in water. Okay, thousands of dinosaurs in an instant, in a day of utter devastation. Anytime you see anything catastrophic, you know that that's pointing towards the flood. Okay, an unstoppable torrent of water. Okay, fast-flowing water churning everything up. This is a great example that is better explained by the flood. This is why how Noah's flood better explains dinosaurs. All right, another one here is the nature of burial, the dinosaur posture. Okay, you might have seen images like this when you're looking at dinosaur fossils. This is very common. This is because they were buried, they died in water, or were floating in water. We know right now when we take animals, we take a chicken that's recently died even, you place it into cold water and it goes into this shape right here. So the fact that they're in this shape means that they're floating in water. The fact that we see them means that they were buried soon afterwards. So you have two events going on. One, a dinosaur dying in floating water, getting this pose, and two, it being buried, getting buried up. More evidence of the global flood. Okay, this one's really cool. Ankylosaurs buried upside down. Most of them, 2/3 of them, are buried upside down. So a team was doing a study, and they looked at all these ankylosaurs. They're finding a good number of them buried upside down, and they're trying to answer that. And they came up with 4 options, including that maybe they were clumsy, but they settled on this bloat and float option. They're saying, okay, these dinosaurs died and were floating in water. And with waves coming on, turning them around, up and back and forth, most of them are going to end up upside down because of the shells, because the heavy armament on the top of their backs are going to. So when you see 70% of ankylosaurs buried, you know that the majority of these, if not all of these, were buried in water, buried upside down. So again, more example of dinosaurs dying in water. All right, this was great. A worldwide phenomenon. Again, focus on the yellow. Dinosaurs are buried in marine fossils. Right here, dinosaur fossils found in rock strata with marine fossils are commonplace, not the exception. Okay, more of that. This is a secular person making this comment. He said, This is unusual because it's a dinosaur from marine rocks, a bit like hunting for fossil whales and finding a fossil lion. It's an incredibly rare find. Not for the creationists, though. I'm telling you, dinosaur burial makes better sense within the biblical model. All right, here we have another dinosaur floating out to sea like this. Researchers speculate it's a carcass that's floated out to sea. Not too unusual. Falling to the sea floor? No, usually they float. But here, allowing it to be preserved in sediment. A dinosaur is not going to float out into the ocean and then drop to the bottom and then be buried. It would have to have an underwater landslide to cover it up. In order for it to be fossilized, it has to be covered up. And we know this because we've done experiments where we've taken animals, put them, carcasses of animals, crocodiles, sometimes pigs, put them down at the bottom of an ocean, strap them down there, and see how long it would take for them to be fossilized. And they don't get fossilized. They get eaten up, deteriorated, scavenged. They don't get fossilized. So this dinosaur didn't just float down and get covered up. It was buried. Either something catastrophic took it out into the ocean, or most likely the ocean came up onto land and buried this. More dinosaurs being better explained by the flood. Okay, this one is really neat. We have 25 dinosaurs buried in one layer with their feet sticking through the layer below them. Okay, 2 catastrophic events are going on here. One, you've got flood. You've got a bunch of mud. Okay, now you have a dinosaur. This is the top view of them as they mapped them out, where they were located, walking into this mud. Then another mud layer comes on and buries them. Okay, soon after that, another layer, and it was so buried quickly that they looked like they were preserved, quickly buried. 2 catastrophic events, one in a row, burying these animals. Get this, there's no bioturbation in between, okay? Not just in this layer. This is very common to see rock layers with no bioturbation. If you want to challenge a young Earth creationist, just go find all the bioturbation between layers. It's very hard for them to find that. This is a worldwide phenomenon, a separate topic, but it's a good reason to believe in the global flood. All right, for the next section here, I'll come from this one video. I'm going to leave a link on the bottom. It's really good. You ought to go watch the video. I'll just pull out a couple of pieces. One, like here, he's talking about the arc and float models, whether it would survive. But he had some really good points. This one was really good. Okay, huge bed of 10,000 myosaurs buried in mud. Just that topic alone. This absolutely speaks of the creation model. The fact that you could have that many in an area over a mile long. This was a huge catastrophic event, burying all these dinosaurs. That makes absolutely better sense within the creation model. But it gets worse for them. There were no young. Okay? What would be going on that would cause them to either abandon their young, or their young get carried along, died somehow? Well, remember when we talk about the beds model, you'll see a tsunami will come in. Some animals get washed away. Well, the smaller ones are going to get washed away first. So, great example where dinosaurs make better sense within the creation model. Dinosaurs buried furiously. Okay, 97% of all dinosaurs are scrambled. Okay, not just, dinosaur laid down and then a flood came on and carried it. No, scrambled, torn apart, captured in one area, by a tsunami, transported somewhere else, torn apart, and then scrambled together. 97% of them. That is the global flood right there. All right. Also, he makes this point. These dinosaurs are being buried in mud, sand, and ash. Okay, they have a really good video. You ought to watch it, just showing an animation of a dinosaur floating around in water with volcanic activity in the background. That's what we're seeing, mud, sand, and ash, quite a bit. So that was where we were seeing that the nature of burial is better explained by the flood. Next, I want to touch on this topic real quick, and that is dinosaur artwork and folklore worldwide. So throughout the world, we're seeing artwork of dinosaurs, and this is before you could really piece together sauropods. Okay, to really understand sauropods, you can't just stumble on and dig something out and say, "Hey, this looks like a big animal." You really have to piece these things together to get an understanding of how they looked. And back when this artwork was being made, they didn't have that. Okay, so the fact that we see dinosaur artwork throughout the world points to the global flood. The fact that there's folklore accounts of people interacting with dinosaurs worldwide, that makes better sense. All this making better sense within the creation model. All right, I want to turn our attention to how they went extinct. When I listen to secular scientists, they really struggle with coming up with a good model for how they went extinct. And to them, it wasn't that it's just the asteroid impact. We hear that a lot. It actually had to be more than that, because it was a decline that occurred over time up until that supposed asteroid impact. But anyway, it's a difficult one for them to describe. Within the biblical model, it's really simple. All those dinosaurs we see in the fossil record were buried in the flood. There were a few dinosaurs that were carried on the flood, on the ark, and as they exited after the flood was one large ice age. By the way, we have a better answer for why there even is an ice age. Good question to ask them. Hey, what about the ice age? Anyway, before the flood, the environment was much more conducive to these large dinosaurs, a lot of vegetation for them. Right after the flood was this ice age that drastically changed the climate, and those few dinosaurs on the ark then didn't survive, and so that's how they went extinct. So I believe we have a better answer for why they went extinct. All right, this is a good one here. If you're an evolutionist, you have to believe the dinosaurs evolved. Okay, this is a slow and gradual process, but you do not see this slow and gradual process in the fossil record. You see a sudden appearance of fully formed dinosaurs. Okay, this is a problem for them. And look at this comment right here. It's amazing how clear-cut the change from no dinosaurs to all dinosaurs was within the fossil record. So this is a challenge for them. It is not a challenge for us. So to summarize, regarding dinosaurs, biblical creationists have a better answer for all that soft dinosaur tissue, a huge problem for them, a better answer for carbon-14 existing within us. This tells us that they cannot have lasted for millions of years. We have a better answer for all those tracks and footprints, a better answer for the eggs and the egg nests, a better answer for the nature of burial. There's a lot within this one right here, just the fact that you have huge dinosaur graveyards. All right, and catastrophic activity that's jumbling them up and tearing them apart and carrying them along to somewhere else. All of them buried within water, within marine sediment. Okay, buried with sharks and clams. This is stuff that you see worldwide. It absolutely speaks of Noah's flood. The fact that we still see artwork and folklore throughout the world is because dinosaurs did exist not too long ago. All right, we have a better answer for their sudden appearance. God created the dinosaurs on day 6. So, the conclusion is, this question, what about dinosaurs, is not a question we need to answer. It's one that we get to ask, and we get to ask our evolutionist friends. So, there you go. I suggest go back, rewatch all this, go through some of those links, get yourself highly educated on dinosaurs, and go get yourself a dinosaur t-shirt. Start wearing it around. Start going up to your friends and saying, hey, what about dinosaurs? And while you're at it, what about the Ice Age? Or the coal seams? Or the Grand Canyon? Or underfit rivers? Or water gaps? Or flat gaps? Or Inselbergs? And plateaus? And magnesium modules? And the Big Bang Hubble tension? And the missing antimatter? And missing monopoles? And comets? And mature distant galaxies? And the Earth's magnetic field? And young rings of Saturn? The moons of Saturn? Abiogenesis? Genetic entropy?